Yes, we will get started. I have to, there we go, make some smaller screens here. So, welcome again. And for those of you who might not be familiar with us, we are the Columbia Land Conservancy. And we are a nonprofit land trust who works with the community to conserve the farmland, forest, wildlife habitat, and rural character of Columbia County, while strengthening connections between people and the land. Nature Night came out of an idea of offering a way for people to connect during the colder months. And, we started them in our office in Chatham in 2019 and decided to continue them this year. And luckily for us, the technology of Zoom has allowed this to be possible and available to more people than we would ever be able to accommodate in our office. So welcome to our virtual office. And I'd like to start out by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous people of most of the land that is now known as Columbia County. And despite tremendous hardships and being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So, why? Well, rewind a second. Becca's coming up with a big presentation about Great Backyard Bird Count. But before we get to that, I thought I would provide a little bit of an overview of why we want to feed birds in the winter and some of the common birds that I'm seeing at my feeders. And, a lot of the ones that I mentioned, that were mentioned in the chat are ones that I'm going to highlight here. There's lots of birds that you might see at your feeders for various reasons, but these are some of the common ones and some of my favorites. So, feeding birds in winter. A lot of people think that it is, we need to feed the birds in the winter. And, I think there's a lot of research that says otherwise, that the birds will survive. But it does help them, since many birds rely on fruit and seeds for survival. The feeders provide this supplemental food source when some of those other sources get scarce. So in addition to that, for us, it's easier to see the birds. We can, have a little longer time to view them, more so than when you're on a walk in, on one of the trails. It also allows you to learn more about the resident birds. There's fewer birds here during the winter than, say, during the spring migration. And this provides you a great opportunity to sort of get these birds down, learn what they look like, learn, what their sort of flight patterns are, so that when some of those newer birds come in, it helps you easily, move into identifying the new migrants. And it's fun. I am a visual birder. I know maybe about 5 bird calls and bird songs. And then I can sort of fake my way through some other ones. The All About Birds website, which is the website that was created by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, has tons of great information, and it's allaboutbirds.org. We'll share a list of resources after the presentation, but it has detailed information about more than 600 North American bird species. And all of the information that I have here in the slides came from All About Birds. They have a great page about tips on identifying backyard birds, because a lot of the field guides have sort of really detailed information about field markings and other, more scientific information. So here are the tips and how we'll sort of break it out and how it's broken out on the website. So first, these 4 tips are You're going to look at the size and the shape. And a lot of the way that they break it out is comparing it to known bird sizes. So is it bigger than a robin? Is it bigger than a crow or smaller than a crow? Which means you do have to know what size those birds are. But generally speaking, I think most people know what the size of a robin is. And we're gonna look at the color and pattern, talk a little bit about behavior, and then a little bit about habitat. The habitat, when you're talking about sort of feeder birds, is not necessarily going to be helpful, but it will be helpful if you're out walking on a trail and seeing some of these same birds that you saw at your feeders. So we're going to go through about, I think, 9 or 10 birds. I had to cut a few out because, you know, time. But we're going to start with one of my favorites, the black-capped chickadee. This is a little guy, about 4.5 to 6 inches. You know, round head, small body, narrow tail. It has the black cap, as its name implies, and it has a little white cheek. They're often bouncy in their behavior and in their flight pattern. They're very curious. They are frequent visitors to feeders. I'm sure most of you have them at your feeders. They like to grab seeds and fly off. They often stash them, and it has been found that chickadees can remember thousands of hiding spots for their seeds, which is pretty cool. And it's amazing to think that, you know, they're hiding all of this food for themselves, but it's also when birds cache the seeds, they're not only like helping the birds get through the winter, it's also a way, you know, that some of these seeds are going to fall on the ground and regenerate. So if it's a seed from a tree, that's one of the ways in which these forests, you know, our forests around here do regenerate. So this is a bird that's not easily mistaken for other species, but they're often seen in flocks with nuthatches and tufted titmouse. So next up, we have the white-breasted nuthatch. And this is a little bit bigger than the chickadee. They have a large head, almost no neck, and a short tail. They're more gray and blue on the back with a white face and underside. They have a black cap and neck, but it looks more like a hood than a full cap like the chickadee. So they're a little different in that they actually are very agile. They creep up and down. You might see them, you know, sort of going up and down a tree, and they probe the surface of the tree for tasty treats. This is the largest nuthatch, and they often, you can see they have a little bit of a upturned bill. And they live in mature woods and woodland edges, but they are a common visitor to feeders. Next, we have there was a number of people that listed the tufted titmouse as their favorite. They are quite cute, about 5.5 to 6 inches. They have a large head, the pointed crest, which is, you know, similar to what you see on a blue jay. And they have a thick neck and full body. They're more silvery gray on back, white belly, and a rusty or peach colored flanks. And they are able to lower and raise the crest on their head. The adults also have a black spot kind of on their forehead above their beak. So they're very acrobatic foragers. They flutter in flight, and they are also known to hoard food by stashing it in the bark. You might see them taking one seed at a time and flying away and coming back. And then they are also common in woodlands, but also to feeders. So another gray bird that you're going to see this gray time of year is the dark-eyed junco. These are 5.5 to 6.5 inches. They're a medium-sized sparrow. I love the descriptions, a lot of these, like round head, short bill, you know, round body. I feel like that's me most of the winter. So they are mostly gray, sort of varying gray on their the back of they vary regionally, the color, but generally it's a dark gray. They have a varying The belly is sometimes darker gray than the one pictured here. The ones I have outside my house look very much like this one pictured. They spend most of the time on the ground, hopping around at the base of trees and shrubs, but will venture into yards for seeds. And they are one of the most common birds in North America, and they can be found across the whole continent. And they also, one of the other distinguishing features is they have prominent white outer tail feathers that are very noticeable when they fly. And again, habitat, open woodlands, fields, and backyards. Next up is the goldfinch. So this is 4 to 5 inches, small head, long wings, short notched tail. They, this time of year, the males in particular are sort of more closely looking like the females with that sort of brown drab color. They have blackish wings with pale wing bars. They're the only finch that molts its body feathers twice a year, and once in late winter and once in late summer. So I feel like this is the bird, because, you know, people say robins are the you know, sign of spring, or bluebirds are, but I always watch for the goldfinches to start turning more bright yellow and feel like that's the good marker for approaching warm weather. They are very acrobatic. Often you'll see them flocking to feeders. They have a bouncy, undulating flight. And you can see them clinging to weeds to pick the seeds out. And they're often at thistle feeders, as shown here. And they enjoy weedy fields and floodplains. Next is one of Rebecca's favorite birds, the cedar waxwing. This is a bird that's a little bit on the bigger side, 5.5 to 6.5 inches, sleek, very sleek, large head with a prominent crest, and they have a short neck, wide bill, and short tail. I love their coloring. I feel like they are just an interesting looking bird all around, but they have that pale brown head and neck, a pale yellow belly, wings in black gray, tail has bright yellow tips, and then they have red waxy tips on their wings, which is where they get their name. They have a waxy red secretion that's found on the tips of some, not all of them. And the exact function of this is not known, but it may attract mates. Unfortunately, can't see it in that picture, but they're very social birds. You can see them in flocks year round. There's I think a resident flock at Greenport Conservation Area that I see pretty often. And they eat berries and insects. They live in woods, farms, orchards, gardens with fruiting trees or shrubs. If you want to try to attract them to your feeders, you could put out a platform feeder with some fruit. They often will come to that. Oh, what happened? That was weird. Sorry about that. All right, next up, the woodpeckers. There's a few woodpeckers that you might see at your feeders or in your yard. The red-bellied woodpecker, one of my favorites. And they are on the bigger side. They have a sleek round head, black and white stripes. So there's, you know, a few black and white striped woodpeckers that you might see this time of year. And in a lot of the guidebooks, they compare them to each other, which is not really helpful. But this one in particular is noticeable with its red cap or the nape of the neck. This is a female pictured here where you can see that it has a little bit of a gap between the red by its beak and the back of its head.
Hey, Heidi.
Yeah.
I think you need to advance your slide. We're still on the waxwing picture, much as I love it, but.
See, on my screen, this is weird. My screen is showing the red-bellied woodpecker.
Maybe click stop sharing and then start again and see if that fixes it.
Interesting. Stop sharing and start sharing. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
All good.
Now you can see the red-bellied woodpecker. I have them at my suet feeders almost every day. and then they have a typical undulating flight pattern. Okay, so now my slides won't advance at all. Okay. The other two common woodpeckers that I saw in the chat as some favorites are the downy and the hairy. And this is definitely one of those situations where they say the downy is 2/3 smaller than the hairy woodpecker, which is only helpful if they're side by side, like in this picture. So a few things to note that might help you identify them is that downy woodpecker has a much smaller chisel-like bill. They refer to it as having a blocky head. I guess I see that. But otherwise, similarly, you know, they have very similar colors and sort of patterns. One way that I was told to remember which one is the hairy versus the downy is the size of the bill related to the size of the head. That if you were to take a little mallet and bonk the woodpecker on its bill, if the bill of it goes almost through the back of the head, it's the hairy woodpecker. It has that much bigger of a bill than the downy woodpecker. The downy woodpecker's bill to head ratio is much smaller. Sounds kind of mean, but it definitely helps me remember it. So this visual is actually from one of the other projects that Cornell Lab of Ornithology does, which is Project Feeder Watch. And there's some great tips there and other visuals for learning how to identify hard to identify birds like sparrows and these two woodpeckers. So that's another great resource when you are torn between two different birds. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Becca. And we're very excited that she's here, and I will stop sharing my screen and introduce her properly. But Becca Rodomsky-Bish is the project leader for Nest Quest Go and the Great Backyard Bird Count at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Her background is in environmental education, and she holds a degree in environmental studies, a master's from Antioch University. And she feels her work with the Great Backyard Bird Count is a great way to engage backyard bird watchers and help guide people in creating bird-friendly homes and yards. So welcome, Becca. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Heidi.
Yeah, and are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share. I am going to just stop my video while I'm talking because that tends to help my bandwidth. I am in a rural area, as probably many of you are, and so today has been good, but if for some reason there is a glitch, we have a backup plan. It may require a little patience, but hopefully we'll be good. Just wanted to put that out there ahead. So I will screen share here for you all, and it's an honor to be here tonight. I'm really, I love talking about birds, like many of you, it appears, love to talk about birds, and I love talking about these projects, so thanks for having me. Yes, the Great Backyard Bird Count. Actually, I would love a little participation from folks. You can either use the chat, or there's that really fun feature down that I use all the time, where you can put a thumbs up or a wave hand, even if you're not showing your video. But has just a show of either in the chat or a little participated in the Great Backyard Bird Count at any point. It's been going on for 24 years, so you may have participated 10 years ago, and that's just fine. But I was curious how many folks have been contributors before. There are no thumbs up or chats. Awesome. Some 5 times. Good. Awesome. Some new people. Awesome. It's always helpful for me when I know a little bit about my audience. Somebody's done it once. It sounds like we have a spread. Some people who have done it quite a few times and others that are new. Wonderful. So the Great Backyard Bird Count is a joint of you who are familiar with Audubon and Birds, they used to be called Bird Studies Canada, they're now Birds Canada. It's a trifecta organization, the project leader, but I work very closely with the others. And it's a wonderful way for us to sort of have as much of a reach as possible, especially in North America. So the history of the Great Backyard Bird Count, it really emerged from this one question that people at the lab had 25 years ago, which was, we know a lot of people love birds. Will those people who love and watch birds record them and actually report that data to us? We know there's lots of beautiful, adorable birds out there, and we know there's lots of folks that do that. So let's see, let's find out. It was really an organic question. And so in 1998, the lab in Audubon decided to join forces to try and answer this question. And it turns out love to watch birds and tell us what they see. So there was the birth of the Great Backyard Bird Count, and it really was the first online citizen science project to do this, also known as community science. It's another term for citizen science, where we ask people to collect data, and then they can enter that data, and we can see the results in real time. And believe it or not everybody realizes this. Those of you who are familiar with eBird, eBird really evolved out of the results of the Great Backyard Bird Count. We saw participation grow consistently every year after it launched, and they said, this is a thing, people will do this. What if we made a scientific tool where we can actually use this data? And that is where eBird evolved from. In 2009, Birds Canada joined the project because we really wanted to make sure we had representation in Canada. And then in 2013, we actually went sort of back to eBird. eBird kind of emerged out of the results of GBBC, but then they created this incredible tool. And by 2013, we really felt like that was where we needed to be putting the GBBC data. So to date, since 2013, that is where, when you submit to the Great Backyard Bird Count, the tool that the data into is eBird. And I'll talk a little bit about eBird. So watching birds, it looks like, based on Heidi's presentation and all of your chats in the comment, that you guys fit this model. A lot of people love watching birds, and believe it or not, it's become a huge global phenomenon. This is an eBird map, and every yellow dot is a checklist submitted over 24 hours. So this is a global activity that people love to do. As many of you might imagine, in this very unusual year that we have come out of and are still in, we've had a huge bump and increase, almost 40% increase in people submitting to eBird, and over 13 million checklists. So that's the amount of times that people push submit my data were entered into eBird, which was a 25. This is a growing activity. People love it. It connects people to what's around them. It connects them to other people who are admiring birds. It's a really phenomenal, it's a phenomenal thing that we're seeing. GBBC last year broke a lot of records, and for North America, at least, most parts of North America, we hadn't quite entered COVID. COVID lockdown happened, at least in New York, in March. So this was even before people were sort of told to stay at home consistently. But we still saw huge numbers last year for GBBC. We saw almost 270,000 participants worldwide, almost 250,000 checklists just in this 4-day window of counting, almost 7,000 bird species. And I love this particular number, 194 countries. So this is really a global effort, which is super inspiring. And this number always blows my mind. But more than 27 million birds were counted. Now, of course, there could have been some duplicate counts in there. That does happen depending on whether your neighbors are participating or not and so forth, but I still think that number is pretty phenomenal. And as you might imagine, especially because of our relationship with Birds Canada and Audubon, about 93% of our participation comes from North America. Actually, second before Canada is India. There's a really huge growing population in India of people really engaged in their birds. And then Canada comes in there third, and you can see some of the other numbers, bigger numbers from around the world. So as far as the count itself, it's a pretty simple way to participate. And that's what I love about the Great Backyard Bird Count. It's meant to be for, you know, the advanced to the beginner and birder. And we certainly try to craft a lot of our resources to support people that are new to this or just have never submitted data. Maybe they've been watching birds for years, but they've never told us about them. Website for the GBBC up in the corner. I forgot to mention that. It's birdscount.org if you wanted to write that down. So for count weekend, you basically watch and count birds anywhere for at least 15 minutes. You can watch longer than that, and at least once during the 4 days. So you don't need to watch and count for 15 minutes every day. You could do it just once over your morning cup of coffee and say, hey, I just contributed some data to science. And yes, like I said, you can submit or count for longer. It is really important that you keep track of the time because you're going to need to enter that data. If you're doing your counting and you're note taking on the birds on, say, a piece of paper, which a lot of people choose to do, just make sure you mark down when you started and when you stopped because you're going to need to enter that information into the tool. And then you really want just your best estimate on the numbers of birds observed. And your feeders are probably like mine. I can sometimes have a dozen chickadees, or maybe it was 8, or maybe, you know, it's very hard, right, when the birds are feeding and there's lots of them. But we're really just looking for your best estimate. It is okay if you're not 100% spot on. And then in terms of entering birds into the data tool, I'm going to give you a couple of tools that that we are encouraging people to use. And it really depends on your style. Some people like to enter in one bird at a time. Some people like to enter in all their birds. And I'll tell you which tools are best for which. And then, of course.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
We're having a couple small audio glitches.
Okay.
Like maybe a word or so cuts out every so often. I don't know if there's anything to be done about it, but I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, I'm sorry if I am glitchy. I don't, the only other option I could do is run over to the house and call in. Would you prefer that I do that?
No, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Okay, I
Yeah,
apologize.
I think we can still follow along.
Yes.
Slides have such good information on them, and we'll be sure to send all this information out later too.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry about the glitches. Internet, if anybody else has their video on, if you turn your video off, that may help. Just FYI. So again, you only need to participate one day, but if you want to participate more than one day, that's great. And you can count the birds wherever you like. This is one of the things I do love about the Great Backyard Bird Count. You could literally just be sitting and literally having your morning or evening warm beverage out your window and count what you see. And it might just be one bird. You could use your backyard, go for a little walk or stroll, or your neighbor's backyard, sit on your porch or patio, city streets. So this is not for just people that have land, right? We can be doing this in our cities. There's lots of birds in our cities to be watched and admired. Parks, nature centers, really anywhere where there's birds, which is pretty much everywhere. We actually love to get data from all over. This is a beautiful image from people counting in India. And it is obviously incredibly important this year that we're very careful about all regulations in terms of distancing and wearing masks if you're birding with people who you don't reside with. And then why participate? Very good question. Really, it's fun and it's easy. If you like birds, this is a wonderful way to engage and contribute. And it really connects you to nature, as all of you probably know, especially in the winter, right? Where we're cold and we're inside a lot. There's just nothing more beautiful than feeling that connection to the outdoors, even if you're not physically in the outdoors. And there's actually been some really fascinating science that's been coming out about this. There was a couple of papers published. One of them was here in Germany, and they actually are starting to quantify how nature creates a sense of happiness and fulfillment for people. So there's a real benefit as well as it being fun. And these observations that you submit for the Great Backyard Bird Count, they make a difference. They go into a massive database and used to understand bird populations. And it really provides a beautiful long-term record of birds. We've been doing this now for 24 years, and our ability to have that kind of a length of data set is very powerful. And then perhaps the most important reason why citizen science is so valuable and we promote it and encourage it and love it is because we can't be everywhere all the time. Scientists are unable to meet that, but humans are everywhere all the time in all sorts of places. And so tapping into that collective energy is really powerful. So you might be asking, who are these folks that participate in backyard bird count? And the answer is they're everybody. We have everything from the super professional high-tech bird watchers with all the technology and fancy binoculars who have their regular bird watching route. We have people who are farmers and outside all winter long, no matter where they are, and they contribute the birds that they're seeing. A lot of families participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count. It's a wonderful way to engage kids in connecting to nature. We have community groups that do it, and students, lots of classrooms and community centers. This is a teacher in Canada who built bird feeders with his students and then had them count birds. And then just people that are at home and want to spend some time looking out their windows and telling us what they see. So it really runs the gamut, and literally people from all over the world. So what do we learn in the science end of this? We learn a lot about migration patterns. So the Great Backyard Bird Count happens right before a major global bird migration. And so it's very helpful for us to know what's where at this time, right before birds are taking off to do their annual migrations. And as many of you, or one of their annual migrations, and as many of you know, a lot of birds, we lose birds during migration. It's such an energy intensive move. So it's really helpful to sort of get our fingers on the pulse of what birds are where when during this time. We can also obviously see changes over time because we've been doing this documentation for so many years, and we can start to analyze and find long-term trends. And just in 2020 alone, eBird data, which again, I keep saying eBird because eBird is the tool, not to confuse you, but the Great Backyard Bird Count enters our data into eBird. That is the tool. And just this last year alone, 93 publications were used eBird data. So this data is used by a lot of different scientists to ask lots of different questions about birds all over the world. And many of you may know about this unfortunate finding that scientists at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology led, where we discovered in late 2019, that's when the report was published, that we have lost almost 3 billion birds since 1970, which is about a third of our total birds. So birds are in trouble, not all bird species. There are some glimmers of hope in there, especially raptors and so forth. Many of the birds where we've put a lot of efforts like the land trust, you know, putting land aside and minimizing chemical exposure and so forth has helped some birds, but overall birds are in decline. And so it's really important that we try and use our science to understand why, so we can switch that curve hopefully and bring them back. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of tools, and I recommend that you take a look at these tools on your own. The two that I'm going to focus on mostly are phone apps. So if you have a smartphone, these apps are both free. They're very easy to use. They're very well loved. And I did see in the chat earlier that there was a couple of people that wanted to ID, I think it was ducks, and perhaps some of you want to ID other birds. This tool on the right, or on, sorry, my left, is the Merlin Bird ID app. It's an amazing app. You go through a series of questions, and when you answer those questions about size and shape, many of those things that Heidi talked about during her presentation, it will spit out a couple of options of what you might be seeing based on your location. So Merlin ID app is a wonderful tool for success that we're actually using new this year with GBBC, and I'll talk. And then the eBird mobile app is another app that's a really great way for you to enter your data for the Great Backyard Bird Count. And I'll talk a little bit more about both of these. So Merlin is one that I highly recommend for folks to participate in the GBBC if you're very new to birding. And what I mean by that is you maybe know birds, but you may not know the species that you're seeing. And it would help you to kind of step through a workflow where you can identify the bird and then submit it. So we ask about size and shape, we ask about color, we ask about your location, and then you choose whether it's your bird or not. And if you choose to save your bird with Merlin, if you hit save at the end, that counts towards the GBBC. The reason we push it for new people to birding is because it feels really satisfying to be able to just ID one bird. And you don't enter the amount of them that you see. So this is really a good choice for a solitary bird, or if you just want the experience of sort of IDing a bird. If you are, and the URL for downloading the Merlin app is posted there at the bottom. If you know your birds reasonably well, and you feel pretty comfortable with technology and mobile apps, then eBird might be the best way for you to enter your data for the GBBC. And there's a download link there for the free eBird mobile app. I find it super easy to use. It's not going to ID birds for you, but you're going to be downloading a pack based on your location. And all of you probably on this call will have the same bird pack, the Northeast bird pack. And you would give your location. You're going to map it specifically because the more specific the location of where you're seeing these birds, the better the data is. And then you actually will tell us how many numbers of the different types of birds that you're seeing right there in the app. So this is, and you can make a list here in the eBird mobile app. So you don't enter one bird at a time. You can enter multiple birds and have a long, nice list of your birds on the mobile app. For those of you who don't use mobile phones, there is an online desktop laptop version. What I recommend for people for this is take your notes, spend your 15 minutes counting, write down notes of the species. If you don't recognize a species, maybe write down the colors or the size, and then you could use Merlin to enter that data later. But for the species that you know, write down the time, date, location, and how many of them you see. And then log on to your computer later that day if you want, or you can actually enter your data up to March 1st. So as long as the count happened over the weekend of the 12th through the 15th, you can enter it up until March 1st for our program. Just like the mobile app, you're going to need to map your location here. So instead of your mobile app sort of recognizing your location and helping you hone in on it, you're going to need to map it specifically. And then you will enter in the date and the time, whether you were on a walk, which would be the traveling, and that when you saw your birds, if you did a nice little walk loop, you would hit traveling. If you're just sitting at home out your window, you would do stationary. Those are really kind of the two that most people will, incidental aren't very commonly used, at least for the GBBC. And then you'll do your start and end time, how long you watched. And here, this is really important, especially if any of you are planning to count with others. Whoops, sorry, that went too quick. You can type in your party size. So if you're birding with your partner, you could type in 2. If you're birding with a community group, you could type in however many you are. And if there's anything unusual you wanted to report, you can add that at the bottom. And then you will create your list here on the desktop laptop, similar to the mobile app. You'll type in how many species of the different types of birds that you are identifying. So that's kind of the way to participate in GBBC, but I did want to give a little bit of time, because I know you all are land trust oriented folks, to talk a little bit about land trusts, about the land trust and how the eBird tool specifically is really starting to join forces with some land trust efforts. So we actually have a grant application open right now. It's open until March 1st. And I actually worked for a short stint on this project, and it's a lot of fun. It's very inspiring. We give away 4 to 6 capacity and partnership grants. And if this is of interest to you all, you can take a look at it there's the Land Trust Alliance. Well, actually, birdtrust.org is where you want to take a look for this specific information. But there's a couple of grants for lower amounts of money if you're starting a partnership where you really want to expand bird habitat, or partnerships with other land trusts that might be wanting to expand habitat for birds or anything related to bird conservation. And then there's a pretty generous grant of $25,000 for actual projects. So management and restoration projects that land trusts are doing or want to do. There's some larger funds for that. And then there's a small pot of money that's specific to California. So there is some support at the Lab of Ornithology for people that are involved in land trusts and have ideas about how to expand capacity to support birds. And eBird is one of the ways that the land trust grants are being utilized. It's a tool that we really recommend people weaving into whatever plan that they choose to pursue with land trust grant money. This particular example is one from out west, a Chilean Douglas land trust that received one of our grants a couple of years ago, and they had an annual bird festival where people were going on walks and birding every year, and they decided to use that event and turn it actually into a citizen science project. So instead of just doing these one-off festivals, what if we do these festivals multiple times a year and we engage people in counting birds? And so they actually joined forces with local school groups, and they helped to create markers and visual things to help people who wanted to participate in these walks, bird walks. And they increased the regularity of the monitoring to monthly, using community folks and volunteers. And people would go out on these same routes every month. So we have consistency of location and obviously a year-round marking of what birds are there or identifying. And then they can use that data to understand and make management choices. And ironically enough, right after this grant got rolling, there was a massive fire that moved through and took out a lot of the habitat. And so now what they're using is they're kind of down to a baseline, and they're using these bird identification tools to try and see how birds are coming back in this post-fire monitoring. So they had a little data before the fires, and now they're going to have a lot of data. What happens when our landscape gets completely disturbed, and how long does it take for birds to come back? So there's some really interesting stuff that land trusts are doing to tap into birds and use birds as a part of their management plans and practices. So in addition to perhaps maybe you don't want to apply for a grant, or it seems like, you know, something you're not quite in a position to do, there are other ways that you can use eBird data, even if you don't have a grant, to help inform some of your own work. As many of you probably know, if you do apply for any grant, they want data. And so as a part of your land trust initiative, if your land trust is able on all of your various parcels to document birds and have that data in eBird, you can use that for grant applications, and it makes your grant application that much more powerful. It's also a great way to just engage your land trust members. So this is a really tangible thing. People can watch and count birds anywhere using eBird. And so it's a great tool to kind of dangle in front of people and say, hey, if you want to participate and give back, you can have a role. And then of course there can be stewardship and monitoring programs that you are informed by the data. So if you, for instance, notice that a species was very common on a particular parcel of land, and then all of a sudden it's not as common anymore, perhaps you can use that to inform some stewardship choices to bring the bird back. And then of course you can always use it for evaluation and assessing. And then the tools themselves are there to support you. So you can see lists submitted within the, you can see lists submitted in your land trust region, and you can see who's engaging, what species are where. It's a really fun tool to weave into any kind of land trust efforts that you're engaging your community with. And that is all I have for tonight. I would love to answer some questions if people have any. That is the email if you want to reach out to me with questions after this, gbbbc@birds.cornell.edu. And I hope several of you will consider participating this year in this really fun weekend with birds. And I will stop sharing and turn on my video so we can have a conversation.
Thanks, Becca. That was great. I think there's so many opportunities for people to participate in, obviously, you know, the Great Backyard Bird Count. And historically, we had done a program for the Great Backyard Bird Count weekend. We set up feeders at one of our conservation areas and would do a public program around that. This year we decided not to due to the COVID restrictions, but that was one of the reasons why I was excited for you to be able to come and talk and you know, get people excited about it. Our sites, our 10 conservation areas are hotspots in eBird. So that's I think one way that if people are out at one of our conservation areas and you put your location in, it should pop up with one of those. And then you know, that we definitely look at that data for various things. But yeah, I love participating in it. I think it's a really great, like you said, it's easy, it's fun, and it sort of definitely feels, I can do it from inside if it's a really cold weekend. So
Yep, exactly. Nice. So there's a couple questions I want to make sure we answer. Anna asked, so yeah, data is submitted through eBird for the GBBC. So any, and one addition this year is any saved bird IDs with Merlin will count towards GBBC, as well as any entries into eBird directly, whether it's the desktop or the mobile app. So all of those count this year, which is going to be really exciting. And then the other question, I have a feeder, pick seeds, but they come back from, yeah, so double counting. I really encourage people not to get too concerned about double counting. It's really just an estimate. And I recognize that some of these birds are in and out and you're not sure if it's the same one that was just there 2 minutes ago. It's quite possible, but I'm not sure. So don't stress too much about it. If you're pretty confident it's feeding multiple times, then I would take the total amount of times that you saw that bird in the 15 minutes and just half it. But in general, I tell people to just, you know, we recognize it's hard, especially at bird feeders, especially with like species like chickadees and titmice and that are in and out, and it's hard to know if it's a new one or not. Let's see, Christmas Day bird counts. Great. So Christmas bird count, that's a great question. That is an Audubon project, and that one runs in December. It's another incredibly important monitoring project, and it's been going on actually longer than the Great Backyard Bird Count. I actually don't know exactly how long, but I think well over 50 years now at this point. And that graph that I showed you with the 3 billion birds lost, Christmas bird count data was actually a huge part of the data that was used to crunch that analysis. So the Christmas bird count data is incredibly important as well. It's a different database. So eBird data and Christmas bird count data are not housed in the same place. But it also is incredibly important. It's not directly connected to this count. Let's see. Will there be any other connection from you or a sign up commitment? That's a great question. Well, I guess we can do that one of two ways. Heidi might be able to answer that on their end. I think she said she was going to follow up with some resources maybe. Yeah. And then on our website, there is a place to, on our homepage, to sign up for an e-newsletter. So if you would like to be connected and get sort of reminders, I know I appreciate those too. You can sign up for our e-news directly and we will send them to you. Can I observe as much time as I choose? Yeah, absolutely. There's no maximum. I mean, obviously, if you entered in that you watch birds for 24 hours, you'd get an error, as impressive as that might be. But yeah, if you watch for 3 hours, that's fine. Maybe you're a big walker and you took a really long hike that day, totally fine. But I need to get my birds for January. They keep coming to. That is a good question. I actually will kick that back out to the community. I personally don't have a water heater for the water that I provide in the winter, so I just put fresh water out. Does anybody else have any tools that they like, that they use? No?
I just empty mine out and put it away. And I think every so often I give the chickens some fresh water, and the backyard birds seem to appreciate the chicken water that's outside too. Maybe it has more flavor.
I'm in the same boat as that. My chickens and birds get the same water. So I'm sorry, I don't have any better recommendations for fresh water or tools to keep it thawed out. Are there other questions? I think that's the last one in the chat. Did I miss any, Heidi or Rebecca? No. Okay. Does anybody want to ask a question? Oh, there's a new one. Bird bath heaters on Amazon. There you go.
yeah, I think we definitely left time for questions. Elaine, I'm not sure if your question was specifically about volunteering with CLC or with the Great Backyard Bird Count in you know.
I was interested in the bird count primarily right now. Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm feeding, this is the first winter I've been here continuously because of the COVID. Otherwise, I'm always running back down to New York City. And I've just been in a state of thrill since last March. It's one of the benefits of being in quarantine. The birds are pretty nice companions.
Totally.
So a question came up because I saw I was on a site and then something happened. It was interfered with, but they were going to talk about food that's not good to give birds. Does anybody have good information about that? Do you have any comments? Things not to do with feeders or at feeders?
Yeah, I have a couple, and I invite others to chime in too. If you want to get some follow-up information in written text, Project Feeder Watch, which I think Heidi mentioned she's going to send out some information on, they have some great information to answer that question. That's more lengthy than what I'll provide. But in short, if you're hummingbird feeders, probably one of the most important things is not to use the dye feeding. So you want to not make it pink and red and not buy that in the stores. It's really a simple sugar water solution that you can make at home or you can buy, whichever you prefer. But that's probably one of the most important for those sweet little hummingbirds. And then in general, I encourage people to err on the side of non-processed foods. So there's a lot of temptation for people to put peanut butter out and throw their kitchen scraps and so forth. Yes, you can do that. I generally encourage people to err on the sides of seeds and stick to seeds. An exception to that obviously is suet. Suet is an important nutrient resource, and you can use peanut butter. I generally tend to lean more towards the animal fat, but you can use peanut butter for suet if you're making your own suet. But in general, I discourage, any kind of highly processed food. If you generally don't want to eat it, I probably wouldn't recommend that the birds do.
Well, it's a good rule.
Any other people's thoughts on that?
no, I think I was reading something recently about sort of similar to that line of thought about, like people often put bread out for birds, and that's not a great, it doesn't have a whole lot of nutritional value. So it's better to stick to like the black oil sunflower and those kinds of things. The other thing that I would say that, is just keeping the feeders clean too. I think that's something that, especially, I do it definitely. I'm better at it with the hummingbird feeders because I feel like I have to change the water so much, or like refill them. But yeah, I think periodically cleaning even the feeders in winter so that there's no disease spread and things like that.
Yeah, and many of you may already know, but there is a very contagious eye disease that finches predominantly get and spread very quickly and easily on feeders. So if you by any chance happen to have a bird visit your feeder that appears to have some kind of a weird eye, sometimes it looks like a callus, sometimes it looks like almost like the eye isn't open at all, and sometimes it's not, then please take your bird feeders down for a while and give them a very, very good cleaning, like, rigorous soap scrubbing. Finch eye disease is not as prevalent as it once was, but there was a period of time where we were seeing major problems in our finch populations. So that's why we emphasize cleaning. What about keeping squirrels away from feeders? Good question. It's hard. I think the only answer that I have found is a squirrel. There are specific designs, and they do work, that you can purchase feeders that have this special caging around them that the birds can access and the squirrels cannot. So 100% keep them away. That's your best bet. You can do what my father-in-law does, and he catches them and takes them on a little trip up the road. And that will keep some away for a little while, but I guarantee more will show up. Squirrels are tough. Unless you have feeders that keep them out, you're bound to probably have some some squirrels taking seeds. Let's see, I just downloaded the eBird app and it asked for an email, but I didn't get any thoughts. Sometimes there's a short delay. So Veronica just downloaded eBird app. Nice job, way to go. Sometimes there's a delay and sometimes it does go into junk. And it looks like you checked those. So I would give it a little bit longer, maybe even by the end of this call, and it should show up. Sometimes there is a delay with sign up and email notification. So yeah, so Veronica, let's circle back to that when we hang up, before we hang up.
Becca, there was one, I think you put in the chat early on about the Carolina wren visiting you. And where are you exactly?
So I am just slightly southeast of Ithaca, New York. So towards Central Finger Lakes area.
And I was reading something recently that you know, due to climate change, their range has been expanding. And is that you know, is that something that eBird has been able to identify?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So using that data, we're starting to notice that the range is shifting further north. Now, it's not necessarily uncommon for them to be here in the summer. It's a little more uncommon for them to stay all winter. They usually will go a little bit further south. So that sort of feels a little bit more like the anomaly, is how many of them are actually staying north year round, no matter what. But yes, their range is shifting north. Many species are that way. There's actually some really interesting data in California about hummingbirds that are staying up into Alaska and parts of Canada into the winter. I mean, just unusual. The rufous staying further north and so forth. And you know, it's a combination of climate change and it's a combination of human feeding, right? There's sort of, where there's resources available, birds are smart and they will stay if they can. Why not, right? Migration is incredibly energy intensive. Birds spend a lot of energy migrating. So if they have a resource and the temperatures permit it, birds are staying further north. Let's see.
I'm wondering, when we first came to Copiague in 1979, we had quite a few evening grosbeaks feeding in the winter, and then they stopped. And now I don't see them either in the winter or the summer. I see the rose-breasted, and last year I saw them they stayed for a couple of months, actually. Say late May into early July. They stayed for quite a while before they moved. I don't know where they go. I guess when they're nesting or something, who knows? But what about the evening grosbeaks? Does anybody ever see them? I'm in a semi-wooded area. There are houses and there are ponds and lakes over here, Copiague Lake and Robinson Pond. So there are water features and deciduous woods and of course housing.
Yeah, evening grosbeaks are a true migrant. I have not heard of them staying this far north in the winter, that bird. But yeah, they need warmer climates and they generally will go further south. Did I say evening? I meant rose. Rose-breasteds, yeah. Rose-breasteds, sorry. Evening grosbeaks are the opposite. They prefer to stay as far north as possible. So that in Canada, if they can, all winter, they are what we call species. And many of like red poles are eruptive. Many of our eruptive. And what that means is they live usually in sort of a northern, more boreal Canada area. But based on temperature and source, if it's a bad sea, erupt, and they will travel usually together further south to try and find food resources if they can't find what they would like to eat north. So one of the reasons why you won't always see evening grosbeaks every winter is it really just depends on what the erupt, and they'll come south. Sometimes they'll stay north. They prefer to stay north, but they will come down. I had a flock in my yard last, they arrived about this time and they didn't leave until like spring. I thought they were going to nest here, but Canada for nesting. So it really just depends on the time of year and the resources.
Okay, good. Thank you. I got most of that. We
Sorry.
lost your, yeah, I know. I didn't even want to say, but I got most of it.
Okay. And it looks like some people saw them in East Chatham. Any other connection? Sorry.
And yeah, and if, folks think of other questions after, we log off of here, I will send Becca's email in our follow-up, along with the video recording and some other resources. So have no fear if you think of another question after we are done here.
Since, you were talking about Cornell, I don't know if everyone knows, you may want to talk about their courses that they offer. I have taken a wonderful course in bird calls with great audio support and practice sessions. And now I'm taking one on shorebird identification. And they're really good about not setting the time that you have to finish them. In fact, I think the bird calls is still open for me, and it's been a couple of years. I shouldn't admit what a slacker I am, but it's a nice feature because then you can go back to it, a month or so later and kind of renew what you're learning. And they're very, very well priced.
Thanks for plugging that.
Yeah.
I put the link in the chat if anybody is interested in following up. They are awesome courses. Best time to winter. Maybe somebody who has a better connection should answer that. I don't want people to drop out, but somebody's asking the best time to bird in the winter.
Dawn and dusk.
Yeah, I mean, based just anecdotally on when I am out with my dog, I do feel like it's a little bit later than dawn. I think the birds probably have to warm up a little bit in order to start flying, but I definitely start seeing birds at my feeders and sort of flying around probably about 7 in the morning. And today was cold here, and they were out just all day. And so yeah, I don't know if it's as strict of time frame as in the summer and the hotter times of the year. At least, like I said, anecdotally, I feel like took a walk at Ooms and there was no birds. Was it windy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I feel like wind definitely impacts and probably pressure changing.
Mm-hmm.
So, not at all.
There could have been a raptor close by. They will scare away every songbird imaginable. So if there was any kind of hunting or predator in the area, that can also deter birds. And it feels like there's nothing around. They'll just disappear.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that we do have a lot of raptors at Ooms. Sort of random question that just came to my mind was I've noticed crows at not at my feeders, but on the ground around my feeders, and not every day, but just sort of periodically. Like, does that seem like a normal activity for crows?
Reading a question that somebody direct chatted me.
Oh,
Tell me
sorry.
what is happening with the crows? I'm
Well,
sorry.
they're visiting like the feeder, like the ground around the feeders.
Oh yeah, that's very common. Mm-hmm.
This is the first year I've ever had that, so I was pretty surprised. And I have like 3 different areas with feeders set up, and it's only one of the feeders that they go to.
Is it a different food source?
No, black
No.
oil sunflower, yeah.
Raven actually feed at our feeders for weeks. I actually think it was maybe not super well. Not that your crows aren't well, but they, yeah, crows and ravens will visit feeders, especially if they're having a hard time finding resources elsewhere.
That's what made that. I wondered if that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to just answer this out loud. Birds have changed their eating habits. Some never ate at feeders, now they do. Mourning doves always ate off the ground, and now they'll eat from a feeder. That's really common. You'll notice that, and you will notice that certain species of birds really do favor eating, but they'll adjust. So for instance, mourning doves, if they used to always eat off the ground and now they're at their feeders, that could be a sign that they're becoming more comfortable with your food resource and they're willing to try the feeders. Mourning doves are not the sharpest tools in the shed. You may have noticed this with your birds. And so they're very cautious about feeling comfortable because they're and so, yeah, they do prefer to eat off the ground. If they start to feel really comfortable, they might visit your feeders. And it's very common to change their feeding habits for lots of different reasons. And a lot of it has to do with, their comfort zone, what's going on with other birds. You guys might be familiar with aggression. And, different species sort of dominate bird. They swoops in, almost everybody leaves. They're kind of second to raptors. So dynamics that go on at feeders. A lot of it, we're not always 100% aware of it, though there are some efforts at the lab to quantify it and understand it more.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed just watching my own bird feeders, it seems like some birds are more like bossy than others. And then sometimes the chickens are the ultimate bossy birds and run over and try to scare everybody away.
That's funny.
Then the squirrels come in and just everything breaks loose. Lots of little nature dramas.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Nature dramas.
Well, if there's no other questions right now, I think we will just say thank you very much to Becca for joining us and providing all this great information. And sort of along the same lines of observing nature, we next month's Nature Night is a nature journaling. It's called Nature Explorer Sketchbook, and it's on February 18th with a local artist, Jean McKay, who will be bringing some tools for nature journaling. And this was, of course, one of my nature resolutions again this year was to nature journal more. And I think, bird feeders and backyard birding offers a great opportunity for nature journaling. And then that'll also help build your skills for bird identification. So we hope that you can join us next month and and sign up for the Great Backyard Bird Count email. It's lots of great information, great visuals, and we'll send a follow-up email early next week.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.